Hello and welcome. So today's video is about whether the reign of King Charles II of England and Scotland was cursed. Now, Charles did not become King of England and Scotland in the normal way. Yes, he was the heir, and even though technically he did become king after his father's death, he wasn't actually allowed to be king or was crowned. And also, Charles's father, Charles I, didn't exactly die in the normal way either. So in the 1640s, England had a civil war between those on the side of the king and those on the side of Parliament. Parliament won, and King Charles I was executed by being beheaded. England and Scotland then became republics, and the future King Charles II, his mother and his siblings were exiled. But Oliver Cromwell ruled the country as Lord Protector, and when he died, his son Richard became Lord Protector, but Richard wasn't very good at the job, so resigned, and Charles was called back to England to become king. This is what's known as the Restoration. In 1660, Charles was crowned King Charles II of England and Scotland. Now, he had actually technically already been crowned King of Scotland like years before, when they were against Oliver Cromwell, like taking over them, but he was never really King of Scotland because he had to flee. So anyway, he was back and he was king, and they actually had to remake all of the crown jewels because all the old ones, they had been like sold or melted down by Oliver Cromwell and the parliamentarians. So all the crown jewels had to be remade again, and the ones that were remade are still in use today. So because of the tragic and unconventional way that Charles became king, it is said that his reign could be cursed. After all, many disasters did happen during his reign. Now, since the Black Death in the 1300s, plague had popped up now and again in England. The plague was actually more common on continental Europe, mainly because of the English Channel stopping the spread so quickly. But plague still did make its way into England, and when plague did crop up, yes, it killed a fair amount of people, but it was never anything really major like what it was with the Black Death. So there were some significant deaths when plague came, like in London in 1603, there were 30,000 deaths. In 1635, 35,000 deaths, and then in 1636, 10,000 deaths. But the Great Plague of 1665 was just so much worse. It's estimated that it killed 100,000 people in 18 months, which was roughly a quarter of London's population at the time. So this time the plague had entered England through some cloth that had come over on a Dutch ship to be traded. At first, a few people started dying from the plague, but this was something that happened. But then more and more people just started dying. Now, the authorities, they were really quick to respond to the plague. Any infected people, they were balled up in their houses, and they also closed down the alehouses so that the infection could not spread. Now, Charles and his family, as well as other nobles, they did manage to escape London and go to the countryside, where they were less likely to catch the plague and die. But when more people started to try and leave, the authorities would be like, hang on, what if they take this plague out to other parts of the country? So they actually shut the city gates to stop people from leaving. Clay pits were dug to bury the dead, but soon the bodies started piling up. And it is recorded that some 2,000 people were dying a week in London from the plague. But then another disaster struck. On the 2nd of September 1666, a bakery on Pudding Lane caught fire. Now, there had been many fires in London before because, of course, all the buildings were made of wood and they were like really tightly packed in together. And normally when there was a fire, it was able to be contained fairly quickly with, yes, there was some major damage, but it would have been minimal major damage. But the Great Fire of London took the damage to another level. The fire spread quickly through London due to high winds and also the fact that it had been a really hot, dry summer. Now, the fire lasted nearly 5 days. It was almost completely put out by the 4th day, when the wind calmed down and fire breaks were created by blowing up houses. But going into the 5th day, there were still little pockets of fire that needed putting out. Now, King Charles actually helped fight the Great Fire of London by passing buckets of water. In the end, the fire destroyed 13,200 houses, 87 churches, loads of public buildings, and left 4/5 of London in ruins. And officially, only 6 people were recorded of dying in the fire, though this number could be a lot higher due to maybe some poorer people not getting recorded, maybe homeless people not getting recorded, and maybe even because the fire was so hot, it was sort of burning people, so there was nothing left and there was nobody there to be identified. Now, at the same time that the plague and the Great Fire of London was going on, the Second Anglo-Dutch War was also happening. So the Anglo-Dutch Wars were a series of 4 wars from the 1500s into the 1700s. Now, the Second Dutch War started on the 4th of March 1665 and ended on the 31st of July 1667. There was this actual fear that there would be a Dutch invasion, and that fear was kind of sort of confirmed in June 1667 when the Dutch sailed up the Thames estuary to the River Medway and attacked British naval dockyards. Also during Charles's reigns, he had a few issues with the succession. So Charles had a lot of mistresses, and with these mistresses he had lots of children. But with his wife, he had no children. And because his illegitimate children could not become the next monarch because they had to be a legitimate child to do this, his heir was his brother James, who was unapologetically Catholic. Now, England's church was Protestant, and because the monarch is the head of the church in England, that meant the monarch had to be Protestant. But James did not want to give up his Catholicism and convert to being a Protestant. Now, this was actually an issue because since 1588 with the Spanish Armada and 1605 with the Gunpowder Plot, there had been a lingering fear that there would be a Catholic conspiracy to take over the country of England. So there were a few little disasters and happenings during King Charles II's reign that could suggest that his reign was actually cursed. Though just because bad stuff happens during a reign doesn't mean that it's cursed. I mean, there have been other reigns where bad stuff has happened, but it just seemed like in Charles's reign, especially with the Great Plague and the Great Fire, and the fact that both of these were just so much bigger and so much worse than what had happened before, it could have seemed like that maybe God was displeased that England had become a monarchy again instead of being a republic. I don't know. Some people could also say that all this bad stuff happening and the war could have been God being angry at Charles because he had so many mistresses and lived a life of absolute fun. Or it could just been a case of stuff happens. Anyway, do you think his reign was cursed? If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.